Hi. Um, why should you train in Shakespeare as a modern actor? My name is Laris Macario. I am an award winning actor, producer, and online Shakespeare coach. This is a question I've gotten from some of the people that have inquired about online Shakespeare coaching. And the question makes a lot of sense, especially if you're not interested in playing Shakespeare and even doing theater work. Here are a couple of reasons that I think would benefit you as a modern actor. Um, Playing the great Shakespeare characters compels you to grow and expand. You must harness your greatness to play greatness. In other words, you have to grow. There is no playing Shakespeare characters if you don't expand. They're too large, and you can do it for sure. It lives inside of you, but there's no being casual about the work. You got to do it, and you got to do it full out, which benefits you in terms of playing larger than life characters in film and television work, but also just doing the rigorous work necessary to create full three-dimensional characters in the modern work that you're doing now. All of the legendary actors at one point or another in their careers either trained in Shakespeare or will play in Shakespeare. Here are a couple of examples that names that you will recognize: Denzel Washington, who is currently playing Othello on Broadway; Jake Gyllenhaal, who is currently playing Iago on Broadway, and those are two major movie stars. And these guys don't have to do it; they have more than enough money, and I bet they probably got a million and one projects that are on their plate right now. And then they're still coming back to the stage to play these great characters in this extraordinary play in Othello. Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, Judi Dench, Meryl Streep, Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, Orson Welles, Keanu Reeves, Michael Fassbender, Laurence Olivier, and countless others. As you can tell, these people are all Oscar winners, nominees, and legends in their own right. And they've played everything from superheroes to assassins. And I can bet you they've pulled from Shakespeare in one way or another. They didn't need to come back and do it, just like Denzel and Jake Gyllenhaal didn't, but they've chosen to. Why do you think that is? Because the work calls them to it. They're real actors. They're extraordinary actors. They're all legends, and their soul, their artistic soul, calls for these great big characters that are in Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the foundation of all modern acting. It is the wellspring from which most stories, characters, and themes are copied from in the present day. To tap into Shakespeare is the equivalent to tapping into the artistic source itself. There is no part of our industry or modern culture that has not been influenced by William Shakespeare's works in one way or another. This is the source of all modern acting. He used the source of the Greek and the Roman tragedies and the Greek and the Roman comedies and the Greek and the Roman plays to source his material, including others like Holinshed's Chronicles, Ovid's Metamorphosis, right, which is really the bedrock of our modern society and is the bedrock of our art form, dating back even to Thespis in the ancient Greeks. All modern acting comes from Shakespeare. He was the first person to really create full three-dimensional characters that were nuanced, that were deep, that had many layers to them, which is what gave rise to a lot of the modern acting and the method acting that we enjoy today. Without Shakespeare, you wouldn't have the acting that we have today. You wouldn't even have psychology. You would not have the modern person. He invented 1,800 words, 1,200 of which are still used in our vocabulary today. Tons of phrases, tons of quotes. He is the most produced playwright in history for a reason. And clearly people are getting tons and tons of values from the work that he is providing. Here are a couple of modern examples that have been influenced by Shakespeare's work. Sons of Anarchy, Hamlet; The Lion King, Hamlet. Now these are two vastly different works of art, and yet they were sourced and influenced by the same work. Think about that for a second, how much variety, how much nuance, how much diversity is involved in the works that is being produced, right? How much creativity you can source from this work and create modern masterpieces and modern hits. And both of those are huge, huge hits in their own right. West Side Story was Romeo and Juliet. Game of Thrones, which is one of my favorite television shows of all time, was inspired by the War of the Roses, especially the tetralogies of Henry VI to Richard III, which is a group of plays, the history plays in William Shakespeare. George R.R. Martin, who is the writer of Game of Thrones, is quoted as saying the War of the Roses is the original Game of Thrones. For those of you who don't know, the War of the Roses alludes to the roughly 30-year civil war in England between two rival families, the Lancasters and the Yorks. In other words, the Lannisters and the Starks. House of Cards, Macbeth; 10 Things I Hate About You, The Taming of the Shrew; Deliver Us from Eva, The Taming of the Shrew. Again, and those are two vastly different stories, two vastly different audiences, Two vastly different characters, still sourced from the same material. Empire, the themes in Othello are in the show Empire, which is a massive hit that created all these spin-offs, and it was great. Shot here in New York, and I know people that worked on it, and it was wonderful. Succession, which was a huge hit, was based on King Lear, a patriarch that has to sort of battle his children and his kin for the rights to his own empire that he built, right? Most actors are scared to death of even tackling Shakespeare. There's no need to be. If you're watching this and you have even a vague interest in diving into his work, you can already do this. I promise you. Shakespeare is an actor's playwright, an actor's bard, an actor's writer. I promise. But because of this unfounded fear, most actors never touch his work throughout their careers, thus depriving themselves of enriching their souls and enhancing their craft as performing artists, which is what we're actually supposed to do. We're supposed to enrich ourselves with the great works so that we can in turn produce the great works in ourselves. We can nurture the art in ourselves to share it with the world, right? To those that are courageous enough to tackle his works, you are truly breathing rarefied air. Remember that the gold is always found where most never bother to look or are too afraid to look. In ancient mythology, what is the dragon, the big scary dragon, always guarding? Gold. So when you take on the dragon, when you slay the dragon or tame the dragon, you get the gold. And this dragon isn't as scary as people think it is. I make it super, super easy for you. And if you're an actor, as I stated before, you can already do this stuff. It's already in your bones. You already grew up in the culture. So it's not that far of a bridge to gap. When you train in Shakespeare, you give yourself over to the work. You are almost guaranteed, and you give yourself over to the work, you are almost guaranteed to be among the best actors in almost every room you step into. Think back to the names that I stated before. They're all legends. It's not an accident. That all of those legends have either worked in Shakespeare as in their training or have eventually started touching on Shakespeare throughout their careers and even come back after being major stars or being icons or whatever it is. There's a reason for it. It's because it is the most enriching thing you can do. Training in Shakespeare will develop your voice, speech, physicality, intellect, emotional EQ, and emotional range, your imagination, and your capacity to build compelling characters from the ground up. As I stated before, Shakespeare basically invented character work as we understand it today. He had these rich, three-dimensional, compelling characters that all became iconic. They're so big that there is no actor that's bigger than Hamlet. There is no actor that's bigger than Richard III. There is no actor that's bigger than Othello or Iago or Desdemona or Cleopatra or Juliet. These characters are so big that we think they're real. We think they actually existed in history. That's how compelling these characters are. And when you do that, you're tapping into that greatness, into that universal thing, that wellspring that lives in all human beings. We are part of a continuum as human beings, as these actors are part of a continuum, as his work are part of a continuum. When you tap into that continuum, you're not only tapping into yourself, you're tapping into the whole lineage of the Western canon and the lineage of yourself, because you are the child of children. And they're the children of children and the children of children. You have a mother and father. They had a mother and father, so on and so forth, going back through all the generations. And all of this knowledge is passed down through your bloodline, but also through your cultural bloodline in this work. So you're talking about the modern acting and the modern stuff that you can pull from. You start to access the imagination in ways you didn't necessarily understand, which helps because if you can recognize these great characters, right, and how compelling and how universal they are, you can recognize them in modern things, right? Which will lead me to my next point. When you work on the best projects, you become a better actor. When you can become a better actor, you work with better talent. And the better the talent, the better the projects. Eventually, you'll be on an upward spiral that will continue to rise so long as you keep committing yourself to the work and showing up as the best version of yourself. As I stated before, when you start to sort of see through the matrix, so to speak, you're like, oh, that's an Othello-like character. That's an Iago-like character. That's a Hamlet. That's a Juliet. That's a Cleopatra. That's a Queen Margaret. Ooh, I've studied all this other stuff. Boom, I can bring that to the work that I'm doing now and add like an extra dimension that maybe they didn't necessarily realize or understand, and you can bring it to the fore. The best actors they add and they expand on whatever the writer wrote. Now, if you're the sort of actor that's filled with all of this life and all of these great characters, you can add so much juice to the character to the characters that you're playing in the screenplays and the teleplays and the plays themselves that you're playing. We don't always have the luxury to work on the greatest writing. And so we have to bring a lot, sometimes we have to bring a lot to the work, but that's what this helps you to do, is to develop that part in you that really is really creative, that's drawing from that sort of universal knowledge, that super consciousness of the Western canon, and really inject all the great work with the great creative juices that are really going to make you pop and stand out on film and television or on stage. And even if you never want to work on stage, you bring all of that life and all of that vibration, all that positive high vibration with you to the film and television stuff, and people start to just sort of be drawn to you. Not sort of, they're drawn to you on stage, on film, and they don't know why. It's because you're vibrating on a much higher frequency. Because training in Shakespeare is kind of like, if you're training, say you're running for a marathon, which would be a film and television series. Say in training for the marathon, you're running at high elevation, which there's the breath is a lot, the air is a lot thinner, so it's a little bit more difficult to breathe, with a 100-pound rucksack. Say you're training for a marathon in the mountains, right? The day comes when you're going to train the marathon, hence being film and television. You've been training with a 100-pound rucksack, and you've been training in high elevation where your lungs really have to work to breathe. Now you're at ground level where it's warm and you don't have the rucksack on your back. How much faster are you going to be? How much more agile? How much more air are you going to have? How much more explosive are you going to be? How much more filled with life when you don't have all that weight and all that heaviness on you when you go to run the marathon? You're just going to blow by everybody else. So that's really the crux of this, is doing this kind of deep, intense work that you have to do 10, 20, 30 times the work you would have to do on a film and television script on the front end. Eventually it gets a lot easier, but it's enriching work because you keep digging and you keep finding awesome things in yourself and in the work. When you go to film and television stuff, you're just going to be filled with life. So that's a short list. I hope that this gave you some insight and some food for thought as to why training in Shakespeare is indispensable for you as a modern actor. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are a million and other reasons for you to do it. There are many more reasons for you to train in Shakespeare. If you're curious about finding out more, if you're curious about really diving deep into your capacity as an actor, into really great, rich work, if you would discover how great you could actually be and really play these great characters, and you want to take your craft to the next level, hit me up in the DMs. On Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever other platform this happens to live on, or go to childrenofdionysus.com, 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 and reach out. Again, my name is Laris Macario. I'm an award-winning actor-producer and an online Shakespeare coach, and I'm looking forward to helping you be the best actor in every room you step into. All right? I'll talk to you guys soon.